Hey, everybody, welcome to the Total Human Optimization Podcast. Today we have Dr. Robert Puff. He is a podcaster and he has his own podcast called The Happiness Podcast, and it's one of the top shows on the health charts. He's also an author and a clinical psychologist. Welcome, Dr. Robert Puff.
Great to be here, Orlando.
So, we wanted to bring you on. The title of your show is Happiness, and obviously that's something everybody strives for in their lives, but with work, with family, with relationships, and politics, everything there is to being a human, that can be quite the challenge.
It can be. It can be quite hard to find it. So that's why I try to give people some specific steps of how to get there.
So the first thing I want to talk about is, we live in a day and age of social media, and it's no secret politics are crazy these days. There's so much divide, or at least it seems so on social media, and it can bleed into your life. And if you're one way or the other, there can be aggression, and it can totally absorb your life. So what are your thoughts on some of that?
yeah, the key of life, one of the keys, there's a lot of keys to finding peace and happiness in life. And one of the big ones is staying present. So what catches people is, there's a time to deal with something. Like, let's use politics as an example. Let's say you say you're pro, anti something. It's really great to get actively involved. It's really great to socially and media get involved to help, create change. But we're not on social media all day long, hopefully. And so it's when we're not doing that, when we can't proactively make a difference, then we have to get back to say, okay, how do I live then right now? Because what we tend to do when an event happens, instead of like dealing with it when it is time to deal with it, we are spending perhaps, nine times that amount just thinking about it, brewing over it, going and over and over and over again. It's kind of like I call it having the news channel on all day long, but it's in your head. And that constant thoughts on negativity, that constant thoughts on what's wrong, when you can't do anything about it, all you're doing is thinking about it, causes us to suffer and suffer from happiness, or we lose our happiness. So one of the keys of life is anything about it right now. Then what I need to do is I need to live. And one of the phrases I like to say is, there's always something beautiful to be with. So if you're with your family, be with your family. If you're having your dinner, have your dinner. If you're driving your car and listening to this podcast, just listen to this podcast. But what we tend to do, we call the monkey mind. We're just in our heads so much that we miss out on life. Again, there's nothing wrong, and it's good to be proactively involved in things that we care about. But if we do it all day long and that's all we're doing, path of suffering.
Yeah, so here's another part of that equation. When it comes to these issues in life, any type of issue, politics or whatever it is on social media, we're going to have friends, family, maybe even partners that have a different view than us. And that can impact our relationships with those people, and in terms bring unhappiness to us because we feel a little bit disappointed when we disagree with people. And, you know, what are some strategies to deal with that so that we can, maybe, I don't know if the correct thing to do is to bury those feelings, but, as a clinical psychologist, what is your
Right.
recommendation on that?
Yeah, when I was in graduate school, one of the schools I went to was Princeton, and when I was there, I grew up in the Midwest in Iowa. I live in California now, but I grew up in Iowa, so I grew up in a fairly conservative household. And they had, a very strong women's movement there, and they had a very strong gay and lesbian movement there. And I had been taught things that really didn't support that. So what I did is I would, for lunches with both the president of both those organizations. I actually sat down with them for many many lunches. I said, "Would you have lunch with me? And would you just explain your point of view from your point of view?" And we would talk, and I explained mine, and they explained theirs, yours, theirs, and I began to better understand that they weren't, whatever things I had thought. It's been so long, I don't remember but I realized that they had very legitimate points of view. They were logical, and it made sense. Now, there are things, of course, like in politics, where you may talk to your friend and you still may disagree. But what you'll learn is, if you're patient and if you're kind, what you'll learn is, even though you may not agree with them, probably they have a reason for believing what they believe. Not just being crazy. They're not just being, jerks that you may think they are. They've had experiences that led them up to that decision. So part of gracious is trying to understand their position. So that's why I think like traveling and getting to know other cultures and anyone that's different than you, it isn't that you have to agree with them, but it is good to understand them because most people have a very deep belief in what they believe in, and they have a system that holds to that. Now, attacking them and criticizing them will just make them turned off. But if you try to understand the position and then say, okay, I understand, and this is mine, that creates far more dialogue and it creates gentleness. And
Cool. So one of the biggest traits of disagreement is anger, and
right.
when you're feeling hostile, and it feels like when you're backed into a corner, when you feel like somebody is pushing you, and you have to fight your way out, anger appears, and it can come in many different forces of nature, depending on the person you are. Um, but there's some ways we can manage those things, and I believe probably you're gonna have a lot of good advice on that, more than me. So
Yeah, I've written actually two books on anger, so I know a bit about it over the
yeah,
years.
that kind of
Yeah,
qualifies
yeah,
you a little bit.
yeah. And the biggest thing with anger is, I recommend actually never getting to the anger state. Now, you're going to feel anger, which is understandable. Feeling anger is fine because that's you can't suppress your feelings. But what you do with those feelings is completely different. So feel anger and you say, okay, I'm feeling anger right now. So do I want to lash out on this person? This is another human being that matters. If I lash out on them, I'm going to hurt them. And then later, what I call when the dust settles, you're going to feel about yourself because now you're going to perceive yourself as a, kind of cruel. I'm going to really understand their point of view. And when I start getting my temperature raising, I'm going to actually back away. Like with couples, the classic thing I use with couples, start, arguing, it starts getting heated, I say, take a break. Just take a break, walk away and take a break. And the concern I always get back from that is, well, then we won't continue the conversation. So say, here's what you do. You tell them about 5 to 10 minutes, or maybe longer. I'm going to be back an hour. I know your program is into exercise. I love exercise. So say, go to the gym, go work out, get rid of some of that energy, and then come back and talk to them. So they know you're coming back, conversation, but you're going to do it in a very loving, kind way. And if you think about the problem with people think is, well, if I don't get angry, I'm not going to create change. But probably the two in our century, the two people that have created to be Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, and they created great change without any anger. So I think it definitely is possible to create change and to influence people without going to the path of anger.
Yeah, that's great when you talk about fitness, because I know there is no better release for stress for me than throwing on my headphones, playing some really heavy metal music, and getting to the
Mhm.
gym and trying to lift as much weight as possible. That's the ultimate stress relief.
Yeah, it's really great. Yeah, it's one of many. And the key of it is, what I try to teach people is how to be happy. And what I've learned is one of the things that keeps us from happiness is when we hurt other people or we hurt ourselves. Being self-critical or critical or harsh of others is not a path of happiness. And the way I can prove that is I tell people, think about the person that you grew up with that you would describe as a mean person you knew, just a mean person. And then try to find out how their lives turned out. It's turned out pretty putrid. So obviously not all of us, most of us don't choose that path, but there's a pretty direct correlation between the amount of interact with the world negatively correlates with our unhappiness. The reverse is true too. If we, mind you, I'm big into boundaries, so absolutely set boundaries. Absolutely say, I'm not putting up with this. Walking away if you need to, call the police. But lashing out at a person really does lead to unhappiness because what happens is, again, like I said, when the dust settles, we look at our behavior and no matter how much we may want justice to be done here, it's still police officers, for example, get in a lot of trouble when they lash out in anger. When they're doing their job well, they calmly, as much as they can. We like those police officers when they lash out and they get caught on YouTube on the videos. I mean, it's national news. So it is always better to choose a path of setting boundaries in a way where you stay calm. So that's where working out is so great. It is, we have to have stress relievers because life, and taking time. I'm really big into working out, and meditation is the other thing I really recommend. Those two things. I think those two things, if you do those two things regularly, it's really a great way to dissipate that ongoing stress that all of us are exposed to.
Yeah, and one other part of that, you don't know what say if another person really upsets you and really pisses you off and you just
Mhm.
you can't handle them anymore. You don't know what's going on in their life. You have no
No.
idea what the background is. And I like to look at the situation. When I was growing up in high school, there was this one dude who was twice the size of me, maybe, and he was
Hmm.
always picking on me. He was throwing water on me, hitting me in the face with bottles and stuff like that. And back
Hmm.
then, I just thought, man, this guy is just a complete asshole. He's doing it
Hmm.
just for his own entertainment. Stepping forward several years later, a decade later, he's in jail now, and
Right.
he, you
Well, that's
know,
my point. Yep.
yeah, and now I realize, knowing his story, he had a lot of family issues, and
Hmm.
there's backgrounds that make people act a certain way. So if you can break the chain, you should try to break the chain.
Well, and absolutely. And think about kids. We know when I don't, I'm sure some of the listeners have kids, have watched kids, have been around kids. When little kids fight, when they get into a fight, what we always tell them as a parent, we'd say, hey, I know Susie pushed you back, but that doesn't mean you need to push her. I mean, I know Susie pushed you, but that doesn't mean you need to push her back. We always tell them that. But as adults, it's almost like we forget that. In the we almost don't grow up where we know it's healthier to not when someone lashes out at us to lash back, but we have that tendency, and that tendency leads to unhappiness because you know ultimately when the dust settles, we know what we did. We don't know what they did. We don't know their background. We don't know everything, but we know what we did. And again, we can be incredibly strong people without necessarily lashing out. This one of the I like literature, and if there's any Harry Potter fans on the show right now, series it's about Harry Potter. And there's two most powerful characters in the series are Dumbledore and Voldemort. And Voldemort's the evil one, but Dumbledore is of everyone on the whole series. He's the most powerful wizard in the world. But of everyone in there, when they get in fights, they're always fighting, attacking, and to each other. But Voldemort is the only one, no matter what people say to him, he never gets mad, he never gets upset. And I think the message there is that truly when we're in that state of power and peace, we don't lash out at the world. We respond, we are very powerful, but not in a caustic way. So
Yeah, we need to stick together in this world. There's so much divide,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
if everybody could just freaking get along and realize other,
Hmm.
not jump to conclusions about people's actions and assumptions, we'd all be better off, I think. On the other
Yeah.
side of things, there's PTSD, and what
Right.
what that comes with is if you're conditioned to believe from a certain past situation that there's going to be result based on a certain situation that you're in, that can really really affect you. I know from past experiences in an old job that was really terrible, where employees were treated really unfairly, that that as soon as something like that resembled what happened there happens to where I currently work, and it may not even be bad, but it's some kind of basic underlying similarity. I
Hmm.
feel anxious. I feel like I want to lash out, like I'm being backed in a corner, and that's something a lot of people deal with in this day and age.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of that in so many different ways. And so again, anything can be healed. And it's interesting. I read a study recently that talked about guys, we've been in war for so long right now that a lot of people are coming back from the war. And I actually worked 2 years in my training at the VA hospital. So I'm very experienced working in PTSD. And most men and women, when they come back from war, if they come back with PTSD, I mean, what they're doing is they're just thinking about it. They're thinking about it and they're thinking about it. They're spending a lot of time in mind, spending a lot of time thinking about what happened. There are some that come back and have traumatic experiences that actually are quite well. But what they're doing, they're actually not thinking about it. They're not suppressing it. They're just not giving it the thought. They're saying, okay, that's what happened. I'm going to now live my life and live well. So a lot of what happens is with any form of trauma, we tend to reinforce it through our thoughts. So a lot of what I teach in the happiness podcast, to truly be free, we have to work on working towards, again, living in the present and not get so caught up into events that have happened. I mean, we process them. Like you gave the greatest example. I love the example you gave. When you're upset, you go to the gym, you work out of your system. It's incredibly healing. But then when you leave the gym, those feelings stay there. So that mostly you're living life. Because even I, working with people as I have for 30 years now, I've told people the most you can deal with in a day is maybe 5% of the day, no matter what trauma you've been through. That's the most you can deal with in a day to truly deal with it and heal. Any more than that, you're going to be overwhelmed and it won't be good for you. So that means 95% of the day you should be living. And that's the key of life is learning to live, deal with things when they come up, but mostly learning to live well because we have the tendency. What happens is at a very young age, something happens. We're about 2.5. What happens is we have good things that happen, that's called desires. We have bad things that happen, that's called fears. And so what our ego does, our mind does, says, well, I want all good things. I don't want any bad things. So our mind gets created such that it's constantly trying to create good things and push away bad. It seems logical, but the problem with it is in the process of doing that, one is it doesn't work because life is always changing. The other thing that's wrong with it is you're missing out on life because instead of just enjoying life, you get to the point where you're just anticipating the next thing. So it's always someday I'll be happy. Someday I'll get through this instead of saying, actually, right now, I can actually have a beautiful life if I focus on being here now and not being in my head so much.
Yeah, excellent, excellent point. Great words. On another note, let's talk about you for a second. So people
Okay.
on the outside see you and they listen to your podcast and you're a clinical psychologist, yeah, you're an author. They probably think you have your life all together and that your life is easy peasy, everything is going great every single day. But I'm guessing that's probably not true.
No, actually, I try to be pretty revealing in my podcast. It isn't that things go well. It's just that the biggest difference is it's like think I'll use this as a very simple example that every person that listen to this podcast has experienced. Think of driving. When we drive, um, probably sooner or later we're going to come across an incredibly rude driver that could make us very upset. Everyone is going to get upset. The biggest difference is that when we learn to be healthy, when we learn to live well, the difference is, yes, we feel that upsetness. And within 5 minutes, because we realize, okay, now it's over, I'm going to get back to driving. I'm going to let it go. I don't need to create a story about this. I just need to, he was rude or she was rude. And now I'm safe. I'm good. I'm going to start driving. That's the healthy approach. What people tend to do is they carry with them all day long. It may be there for an hour, maybe there for a day. And it's not driving situations, but certain situations people carry with them to the day they die. I knew a woman once. It was a relative of a friend of mine, and she was like 90 years old. And I had never met her before, but I'd heard her story, and she had had a pretty traumatic event happen when she was 7. And I thought, well, I mean, that was a long time ago, so it was an interesting story. So I wanted to ask her about it. And we were sitting and talking, and as I was asking about it, she immediately said, don't bring that up. I don't like to talk about that. It makes me very upset. And that had happened, as I said, like 83 years prior. So we have a tendency to hang on to things. So the difference is all of us have things that happen. The difference is that when things happen, I don't expect things to go a certain way. It's like, oh, that person cut me off. That's what happened. Now move forward. This, if I, whatever the situation be, my kid is sick. I have a client that came in that was upset at me. I expect those things. Like right now, I mean, things happen. This morning, I got up and I have several websites, and I was uploading my new podcast, and my website was completely down. I said, okay, now I need to go deal with that. And you just deal with life instead of saying, why is this happening? This isn't fair. This is wrong. That's where we lead to the path of suffering. It isn't that everyone has things happening. The difference is as you lower your expectations, saying, I don't need things to go a certain way. They're going to go the way they go. I'm going to do my best to make sure I do my part. But when I do my part and I still have things that don't go the way I go, then I just adjust. I just adjust to what's happening. And that's
Yeah.
the key of life.
Yeah, I kind of liken that to, not to be cheesy or anything, but I like to liken that to like email, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your inbox is clear, life is good, but
Yep.
then you get an email and it's an interruption in your day. Now,
Right.
just answer the email.
Right.
Just answer the email, and guess what? Your email box is cleared again, and
Yep.
and you're all good to go.
Yeah, that's good. I like that analogy. I like that line. That's actually very good. I've never heard that before, but it is good. And again, it may, and whether it's full or not, the biggest thing in your mind, if your mind says it's empty, then it's empty. What the biggest thing on happiness is whatever you think is true. I mean, so and this is a hard one to hear, but it's one of the things that it is one of the truisms out there is that when we are suffering, when we're having a hard time right now, it actually isn't the world that's causing it. I know events happen, but it's more what story we're creating about that event. Cal is the example because I know people on the show work out a lot. When you get an injury, there's pain there. So, but the suffering of the pain is where you create a story about that pain. So, let's say you go to the gym and you pull your back out, and now you can't, lift for let's say for 3 weeks. Now, there's pain in your back, but the suffering would be, why did this happen? This isn't fair. I can't believe this. My life, I'm going to now get out of shape. I won't be able to compete in the next competition. Whatever story you're creating, that's the suffering in all of life. When you get that email, in your example, which I like, and then you're done. The pain's gone. You've dealt with it. The suffering would be, that's not fair. This isn't supposed to be happening. And all the stories that we create. So most of what we suffer with in life isn't external. Most of what we suffer with is the stories we create. The good news is with that is that means the solution to suffering, the solution to finding peace and happiness is also internal. Nothing needs to happen externally to be happy. It's an internal change, not an external change.
Right. And as we move forward in this podcast, one thing as we're getting closer to the end of the show, I want to make sure we get into some talk about relationships because our happiness if you're in a committed relationship is highly dependent on that relationship. Something going wrong there, can ruin everything. So I'm interested to know from you, what are some of the common issues that you see coming at you in relationships, and how do you resolve them?
Yeah, the biggest thing is again, what's called an attachment. We suffer from attachments. So life is one of the lessons of life is life changes. Life isn't permanent. So you can be in the most awesome relationship right now. It can be going great, but we know that sometimes people get cancer. Sometimes people are driving home, they get killed by a drunk driver. Sometimes things change. So life is really important to spend energy with your partner, but whoever you're with, and they are important, but we have to realize that sometimes that changes and we suffer less when we understand that, okay, I'm very thankful for what I have right now, but I realize that may change. When we grasp on the relationship really tightly, that's when the fights come in because we get fearful, we get afraid. We think, what if this person leaves me? What will happen to me? What will go on? And I'll be miserable. If you say, at some point, no matter how deeply I love this person, one of us is going to leave because we're going to die unless we get in a car crash at the exact same time. One of us is going to spend a lot of time, perhaps years, being without the other person. So the way to work around that is seeing the other person as a gift, not as a requirement. So part of what helps us kind of release that sense of what I call attachment, that sense of clinging too tightly, is seeing your partner as a gift. And so the beautiful thing about this is then when you come home after a long day, you say, wow, I get to spend the night with you. I get to be with you. What a gift this is versus you better be there and this better be going on and everything better be great. With that attitude, that leads to a path of suffering. But if you're thankful for who they are and you're thankful for being in your life and you realize they may not be there tomorrow, you don't take them for granted anymore so much more deeply because you realize I may not have them tomorrow. I know it can be scary, and it's not that you hanging on that all day long, but it's called negative visualization. But what happens is when we're able to realize the person may leave and be okay with that, then what happens is what we focus on being thankful for having them, and then we realize the next thing, the biggest other thing I teach is that in order to be in a healthy relationship, most have to focus on ourselves. So if you're in a relationship, let's say you're in a relationship and you focus on being the best partner you can be, not really worrying so much about what they do. Just focus on what you can do because that's what you can control. Now, what will happen is if you end up being, a really awesome, loving partner, and your partner doesn't step up to that, then that will make you make some decisions. It will say, oh, maybe this isn't the best relationship for me. If you do that, and then they reciprocate and say, wow, this is great. As ourselves, we can't control other people. So if we focus on ourselves and not on them, then what happens is that leads to a far more healthier, happy relationship.
Excellent. You know, on the darker side of things, how do we know when to pull that trigger? There's some relationships that are just toxic, and,
Yeah.
and I'm talking about
Yeah.
friends too, not just,
Sure.
partners,
Sure.
but friends. And it's been a big thing here, and we talk a lot about it on the podcast. There's a lot of people that have come through the show saying, you need to
Mhm.
have a positive circle, a positive group of people that support whatever you do, and but also keep you in check a little bit. But what are your thoughts on, releasing people from your life that are not offering any positivity or support for what you do?
Well, again, there's a saying. I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard it. Water seeks its own level. So the better you're doing, the better you're going to be attracted towards people like you. We like seeks like. So when you see a couple and one person is like clearly say abusive towards the other person, it's because the person they say they're getting abused say, well, why are they putting up with that? Often it comes from because they don't care for themselves a lot. And if they start caring for themselves a lot, there will be a lot less tolerance of that. So the more we grow on our self-love, then what's going to happen is it's not that we won't still care for other people, but we're going to want to hang out with people that are positive and loving. But in our head, if all day long we're hearing I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm stupid, then we're not shocked to be around people that say that about us. But in our head, if we say, hey, other people, are okay, and I'm just going to work on caring for myself and loving myself, what automatically happens is you're just not interested in being around people like that anymore. There isn't an interest anymore. Usually, where it's coming from, that being with someone is bringing you down, because part of you is there's an attachment there. Part of you there's a bit of I need them to make me happy. And remember how I started this whole conversation was the person that's going to make us happy is ourselves. If we're dependent upon someone else to make us happy, that's a path of suffering. So if we work towards realizing my happiness is an internal job, then when we're with someone, we're with them just because we want to enjoy life. Like they're the dessert of life. Main course is our relationship with our life, with ourselves. They're the dessert, and desserts can come and go. We enjoy them, but we don't need them. So you lose the need, and it's more like a preference. I would prefer to be with you, and that would be great, but I don't have to be with you. That can lead to a path of suffering, and people have to good inside, and they're looking for something externally to feel good.
Awesome. So before we go, I like to leave our listeners with a final tip of total human optimization. If you could provide one tip, one philosophy that everybody should follow, what would that be?
Practice to be still. Just practice getting outside, sitting, and quieting the mind, and be kind of see yourself as being part of nature, not like smelling the roses, not like seeing the trees, not just like being in nature, but like almost like being part of it. Where we spend so much time. I know the social media thing you shared with earlier. We spend so much time thinking. We spend so little time just being. So get outdoors. It's a beautiful way to really love life and enjoy life.